Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kinds of Christians and not the storm of the capital kind. So if you are curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter and I am your host. I am a professor of theology and the lead pastor of the Loft Faith community at Westwood United Methodist Church in Los Angeles, California. If you like the show, please rate, review, share, all that good stuff on whatever podcast platform you're using it. We are now on YouTube, so we will invite you to subscribe to our channel there as well. In today's episode, we are going to be discussing the problem of evil and just evil in general. Super fun episode today and how it impacts our life. I am delighted to be joined by the full crew, Wesley, Blair, and Julia. How are y'all doing today?
It's a cloudy day in Los Angeles, and I'm feeling like a cloudy day.
He's Eeyore.
I know you have a Monday shirt. Does it say Monday?
It does. It says Monday.
Yeah. Just let people know.
And it's not Monday.
I know, but it's like Garfield. It's the energy.
Monday
Exactly.
vibes. It's
Exactly. Monday vibes. That's See, I got it.
It's the perfect time to talk about evil.
Exactly. The perfect time. It's the perfect time. Well, to do that, we are. I was literally gonna call you an expert in evil. So I don't know. I guess I don't know if you want to go with that title, Becky. But we got to know that expert in the theologies surround the way we discuss and talk about sin and evil. We are delighted to be joined by Reverend Dr. Rebecca Copeland. Dr. Becky Copeland serves as an assistant professor of theology and the director of Faith and Ecological Justice program at the Boston University School of Theology. And she's also affiliated with Boston University's Institute for Global Sustainability and a provisional deacon within the Virginia Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. Her research and teaching engage theology, ethics, and biblical studies, exploring the ways in which classical Christian texts and doctrine can be reconstructed, considering what we learn about the world through environmental studies. Dr. Copeland has published 2 books, tons of articles that are super awesome. And the first 2 books that we'll talk about both of them, but the one we're talking about specifically today is Entangled Being, Unoriginal Sin and Wicked Problems, which was recently published in 2004. And her first book was Created Being, Expanding Creedal Christology. All of these,
2024.
I should say, which was in,
you said 2004, but just,
it's
brand new.
It's brand new, 2004, I guess. Yeah, sorry. I'm trying to read.
That would make it 20
here.
years old. It's brand new.
Yeah, trying to read. Oof, always trouble sometimes. But in Unoriginal Sin, she uses a relational lens to reconsider Christian understandings of the incarnation, sin, and repentance. Dr. Copeland, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a sunny day here in Boston, so no Monday.
Heyo.
Oh, so jealous.
Take that sunshine.
I know. We can't really be jealous since it's like sunny here most of the time.
Rarely here.
Yeah, I know. I've been to Boston a handful of times, now more frequently that one of my good friends is your colleague, Dr. James McCarty, so I will be there more frequently, but that's off podcast conversation. But on podcast conversation, we wanted to have you here to talk about your new book. And really, sometimes I feel like we write a book that's just ready for the moment, and I feel like your book, in ways that probably aren't necessarily comfortable for you, meets the moment that we find ourselves in with respect to trying to understand sin and evil in our global context, particularly in light of our current political circumstance. And so I guess by way of starting out, what led you to want to write a book about original sin or about sin in general, given that it is not so much a complicated topic, but it is a topic that people are uncomfortable with talking about and discussing, particularly in progressive Christian circles?
That assumes that I wanted to write this book.
Oh, that is an assumption that I was making. So yes,
sometimes
please
we write what we have to write,
whether
we want to or not.
And it's so funny, Becky, because so the beginning of your book, the very, very first sentence, I thought, oh, what if she wanted to write this book? I think she might have had another book in mind, because I did when I wrote my book. And your first sentence is, life is a complicated mess, and it is only getting more complicated with every passing year. And I was like, man, that's an interesting way to start a book on on sin and evil. So yes, I'd love to hear about, I guess, the origin story of the book and how it kind of came to be.
Yes, I did not ever intend to write this book. I did not want to write this book. I say in the acknowledgments, um, this was not the book. I had a publishing plan, and I have another book that I hope to get to someday. But in 2020, when my first book was coming out, and being a professor, it's true, they say publish or perish. So you have to get started on your second book. And it was time to turn to that, but it was 2020. And in February, Ahmaud Arbery went out for a run and never came home because people chased him down in trucks and killed him. And the next month, in the middle of COVID pandemic, Breonna Taylor was killed in the middle of the night when police raided her home looking for someone that did not live there. And then a couple months later, George Floyd was killed. And as a white progressive Christian with the privilege of being a theologian in a university, I could not simply write the next thing in my publishing plan. I wanted to try to speak to my community about the grappling we were coming to with issues of racism and systemic racism. I mean, those examples, some of it's systemic, some of it's intentional. But for people trying to wrestle with such large systemic problems. But every time I tried to talk about these enormous evils that we oppose, but we don't know what to do about it, you kind of fumble if you talk about it in too large of terms. And so this book took shape as looking at particular instances. And so I talk about in the 3 last chapters, I look at 3 particular instances of injustice and evil that are rampant in the world today: environmental racism and toxic exposure to communities that are impoverished or marginalized in other ways. An immigration system that in 2024 was already causing human trafficking, that was causing incredible harms, and health disparities that leave so many people without adequate health care. And so looking not at the somewhat more abstract topic of systemic racism or systemic sexism, but actually delving into specific concrete examples, because I think one of the most important things is to awaken people to our ability to actually do things, that we can actually respond, that the response that's called for is not simply reorienting our hearts, which is important. It is important to have hearts oriented on the good. But to address evil, we really need to start taking concrete action in the world. And it was hard because this book came out in October of 2024. So a lot of the specific concrete steps that I recommended are kind of moot now, because how do we advocate for more funding so that the FDA can do its job if we don't have an FDA anymore? But it's still going to take concrete steps and responses and doing the work of researching for this book. It's also helpful in seeing and we'll get into your topic, the evil behind a lot of the cuts that are being made. When the administration comes in and says no funding for medical research that talks about race or gender, that means we're not going to fund any research that isn't only focused on how to treat white men. And
say the true thing, Dr. Becky.
People are going to die because of this. People are dying already, and we were actually starting to make some progress. And now we have to double down and work harder to try to save what can be saved and to turn the ship around. So that's why I had to write this book.
Yeah, no, I mean, to me, what you describe is, I always tell people, like, I feel like a lot of what I do is driven by a sense of call, but not like just a regular, like, hey, this tug, I feel like you should do it. Sometimes it is literally, Jeremiah, fire in my bones. Like, it's literally like, I can't not do this. I mean, it's that much a part of how I think and how I move. And that is what I hear you describing. And I think in so many ways it helps us meet the moment because it's so difficult to understand ourselves as individuals within these larger systems. Like I just had this conversation with a woman yesterday, with respect to how Black people participate in racist systems. And it was really hard for her to grasp because she's an older Black woman. And I think it was challenging because that undercuts a lot of narratives we've told ourselves about the way racism works. But it is the way our system works now. Everything is so deeply interconnected, which you so eloquently describe. And I can see how your background in thinking about ecology helps understand the ways in which things are interconnected and how evil in that sense is interconnected as well. Blair, I know you had a question you want to ask.
Well, yeah, I'd love to hear, you gave us the examples, Dr. Becky, of the kind of case studies of these systems of evil that you're trying to figure out. We're all trying to figure out what to do with. And the subtitle of the book, right, is Unoriginal Sin and Wicked Problems. And I know that those are two concepts that you really develop in the book to try and explain these like huge, overwhelming realities of brokenness and evil and sin in our world. So could you give our listeners like a little bit of a breakdown of how do you understand these two ideas of, I don't know which one you want to start with, but the idea of unoriginal sin as opposed to original sin, and then this concept of wicked problems, these problems that are like so much bigger and entrenched than any one person can swallow alone.
Thank you. So I'll start with wicked problems. This is language I didn't coin. It came out of actually the field of public policy, public planning, in the 70s. Prior to this turn, apparently public planners thought that they were basically just doing engineering problems. Everyone knew what made for a good society, and you just give it to the experts and they would figure out how to do it in the best ways. This results in anyone who has studied environmental racism, this leads to highways being built through Black neighborhoods. This leads to polluting industries being located in impoverished neighborhoods. And so as people began wrestling with questions of justice and unforeseen consequences to different things, like we're bringing in an industry. Oh, it turns out that industry produces toxic waste. They started to recognize that these weren't what wicked problems is juxtaposed with the idea of tame or benign problems. Like a math equation, a math problem you would have had in school is a tame problem. There's an answer. You get the answer. It's right or it's wrong. People don't disagree about what the goal of solving that equation is. But with wicked problems, there's no agreement necessary. There's not universal agreement on what the problem even is, let alone what solving it would look like. So it's not just that it's really complicated. It's also that, particularly as we become a more pluralistic society, visions of the good life, concerns for how we live together, make it a lot harder to try to even define what's a problem or what is the problem. Most of us can agree we're looking at a problem, but what is the problem? And then what would a solution look like? And so the people who coined this term talked about wicked problems are never solved. They're just resolved or resolved over and over again. And so it's an ongoing process of negotiating what life together is going to look like. Which leads us to the theological phrase that is there, the unoriginal sin. Typically, in Christian speak, we talk about original sin and actual sin, or original sin and individual sin. And there's a lot of emphasis on original sin as we are all sinful and need to be redeemed or forgiven. And then actual sin has been aligned with things you intend, like when you intend to do what's wrong, like you're out there trying to do bad things. And so most people aren't out there trying to do bad things most of the time. Most of us are trying to do good things, or at least trying to do things that we think are morally neutral. And then we've talked about a third category as systemic sin or systemic evil. And liberation theologians really raise up these issues because they say not all suffering arises from people doing bad things on purpose. Systems get built that carry on bad things long after it doesn't require anyone to intend a bad thing. And systemic racism is one of those examples. And I like the analysis, but one of the shortcomings seems to be that it's really good on analyzing the system that leaves us suffering, but less on how do we then grapple with what we're supposed to do in the face of it. And so I was dealing with this concept of unoriginal sin as a way of thinking about those systems that are multi-generational. They started long before we were born, that are unintentional. We don't intend to do harm by buying bananas at the grocery store, and that are communal. If nobody else was buying a banana, then it wouldn't be a really big deal that I was buying a banana in Boston in the middle of winter. That wouldn't
Wait,
cause.
you what's wrong with buying bananas? Yeah. Like, I think I know, but you can just spell that out for us for a second.
Okay, I should have gone to climate change.
Yeah,
My 5-year-old is going to get
100%
really
know.
upset if I have to stop buying bananas.
Well, I did not make this a chapter in the book, Blair, but I could have. So, I mean, there's a long history. Banana Republic has a meaning, and there is a long history of colonialism tied into the vast consumption of this fruit in this country where we don't grow it. And then its transport across the country and around the world, for me to be able to purchase it in the middle of winter in Boston, which has never grown a banana as far as I know. So it's just ways of thinking about our individual consumption is intertwined into global systems we didn't build that we just assume are okay. But there's incredible political oppression, economic oppression, and environmental degradation that occurs to make sure that those bananas are available for me in Boston in the middle of winter. So sorry. Tell Ansel I'm sorry.
It's okay. We'll survive. But I'm sorry, I interrupted your train of thought, though, because you were explaining how, like, we're putting a theological application on that, right? And that's what you're trying to do with unoriginal sin. Did you want to finish that thought?
So, I mean, in a way, what I'm doing is taking systemic sin and saying it is actually a way of talking about actual sin. It's a way of talking about actual sin that we're all committing without intending to. That actual sin doesn't have to be intentional or intentionally doing bad things. It can be doing things that we think are okay, but that have repercussions that go beyond what we are looking at.
This is something we've talked about a few times on here, the lengthening of supply chains in the name of capitalism, and how the further removed, like, no one knows where anything that they consume comes from. No one knows where their food comes from. No one knows where their clothing comes from. No one knows where their entertainment comes from. Like, no one knows where anything comes from. And so it has created the perfect conditions for human rights abuses and production of everything that we consume. And we consume a lot, which you mentioned. We are consumers.
I know.
Question. Yes, I agree.
I was like, that is definitely one of the things that I think is evident, not only in your book in terms of articulating how that is, we are all entangled in these systems, but how we can understand that entanglement as a way of to understand our participation in that as actually a part of a collective sin, and it is, in that sense, it is unoriginal. And I find that so persuasive rather than original sin, because I think I really have always struggled with this idea. I mean, as you well know, there's nothing in the Bible that talks about original sin. Like, this is a concept that we added to it, but I struggle with that after having, prior to having a child, but obviously after having a child, it's hard to look at this child and be like, oh, there's something fundamentally wrong with this child. That they're inherently sinful or evil or something like that. And at the same time, recognizing that they will participate by nature of them just being American, right? Even though my son is Black, in systems that are going to marginalize and oppress others. One of the things that I wanted to kind of pick your brain about, with respect to the concepts that you lay out in your book, is one of the things that I've been struggling with this last couple of weeks are the ways in which we can participate in these systems that you and I and Julia and Blair and Wesley can be in this conversation full in full knowledge. Like I knew when you talked about bananas, like this is I also am a vegan, as you well know, because of this awareness of, oh, I don't want to be complicit in systems that I know do harm to my people, just flat out. So I just stopped eating meat.
But you do eat bananas, don't you, Dr. Carter?
I do eat bananas, and I do not grow bananas, but
Right.
Wow.
I
So none of us are exempt.
No, oh
right?
God, no, we are all mired.
I wasn't saying you were claiming to be exempt.
Yeah. Oh God, no, I'm not exempt, man. I fly. I'm just even taking air travel to go to conferences.
You could spend the rest of the hour just giving examples of wicked problems.
Yeah. I mean, I get invited to these. I was invited, and we're gonna talk about this later with respect to Pope Francis. Like, I was invited to the Vatican to talk about environmental justice. So I'm flying out in these giant jumbo jets, to go to the Vatican to talk about environmental justice. And my whole time, I'm like, this is obviously an oxymoron, right? I'm like polluting the air while also going to talk about how to stop pollution. So, at any rate. The question I wanted to ask was just around the ways in which people can live in a state of denial around, as you said, not so much the wicked problems. I think we can all understand that there's a problem, but the pervasive reality of how our participation in upholding some of these systems is sinful, right? And so I'm thinking about the ways in which some Christians can normalize either the deportations that we see taking place, or they can normalize access to firearms, even though we've had just another mass shooting at Florida State University. Like, to what extent do you see, or how might this help us address some of the denial that I think might be taking place with respect to what is actually happening in front of us, right? Like, and all of us on this Progressive Christians podcast, we see what it like. We as Jesus would say, we have eyes that can see, we have ears that can hear. The scales have fallen off. We see the rise of fascism, and yet we have other people who are denying it. And so I'm wondering, to what extent you think some of the concepts you lay out in the book might help us, or can they help us address folks who are really struggling in a state, even if they're not conservative, but just even moderate or liberal, of denial with respect to what's actually happening in our current political climate.
I think appreciating the complexity of the world we live in is really vital to this, because it's hard to face it when it's impossible to have clean hands, when it's impossible to become innocent. Part of what's behind this book was a pen that a volunteer at a place I volunteered wore when I was younger, and it said, "I'm not perfect, I'm just forgiven." So bumper sticker theology can be problematic. I think it's important to realize that we're not perfect and we're forgiven, but that becomes really flippant and used by the status quo to make sure we don't do anything. If we're forgiven, then we don't need to worry about how we're complicit in causing harm. And so I wanted to try to think about how we could start to take responsibility for the things that are happening today. And there's two theologians, ethicists that I engage that I find really helpful on this. It's Cynthia Molobida and Emily Towns. Because they really wrestle with structural evil and with the cultural production of evil, and that this is not something an individual sat down and designed. I mean, maybe there is some conspiracy where a small cabal got together and designed all of this, but I don't think so. But it's something that has grown over many generations and that causes the harm it does because of the way that we're all involved in it, that it's almost impossible. It is impossible in many cases to opt out of participating in it, which means we have to take responsibility for taking it apart, for dismantling it, that we have to start taking steps to address it. And Emily Towns calls the process of dismantling culturally produced evil a group project. And I use that, like, it was really inspirational for what I was doing in the book. Is I think so many of us see the group project and we've just been letting other people take the lead. And we maybe show up for a meeting, but we're not doing our part of the assignment. And so I wanted to think about ways that we could all start taking part in the group project of dismantling cultural evil, of addressing unoriginal, of repenting of unoriginal sin, and of trying to untangle and maybe resolve wicked problems. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, you totally did answer my question. And I mean, this has been what I loved about reading your book, just so you know, just in even reading the introduction. I was like, I got to a point where I was like, oh, I really feel like she should. I thought out loud, oh, I really feel like she should use Emily Towns thinking about Fantastic White. And then I was like, oh, it's literally 3 sentences after I thought this that it fits in. I mean, Dr. Towns is a mentor, an idol, and I'm so jealous that she is around y'all now.
She's a BU now. Woo.
Yeah, she
Yes,
is amazing.
it was also intimidating having written this book citing a major scholar, and then she came to work here. So I've always been a little shy in the hallways.
Yeah.
And then she came, there was a book talk at BU on Dr. Becky's book last week or 2 weeks ago, and Dr. Towns was there. And I'll report, she nodded and said, "You're doing great," or something like that to Dr. Becky. So that's like, I know this is all like sort of inside baseball theology academy talk for our listeners right now, but just imagine, the person you admire most who like taught you something really important, like shows up to say, "Yeah, I think you're on the right track." It was a pretty cool moment just for me to watch happen.
Did you see my tears?
I couldn't see them on the Zoom, but I believe it. I believe that you were moved enough.
I guess I'm curious. I think we can all acknowledge that there's like a complexity to the problem, and these things are huge. And oftentimes, what we're offered as solutions, I think about the call to people to just recycle, as if the problem is our individual consumption and not the exploitation that large multinational corporations commit on the planet. Or how there's this whole sort of backlash to plastic straws, as if that was going to be the solution to the problem of pollution in the ocean. But it seems to me that like society seems to, or we seem to offer very small sort of asks to individuals as a way of trying to address this huge problem, which is never going to get us to the end goal of actually no longer exploiting or no longer polluting. I guess how do you communicate the need for like a long-term concerted lifelong effort at addressing these things? Because I think that's what it's going to take to get us to a solution, not sort of just show up one time, say that you did the thing and move on with your life, but like a continual, you need to be in this because this is for your own good, your children's good, your family's good. But with the size of the problem, it feels like the solution is hard to get to, and it's hard to communicate the effort necessary to get us there. And so, like, how have you found that you've been able to maybe convince people or really bring people along to the effort that is really required to address these issues?
There's actually 3 things I want to get at in your question, which are it's such an important thing. I'll get to the end point then later. But first, one of the things I wanted to address is there's a false dilemma set up by environmentalists and corporations, where corporations say it's all the individual consumer's fault. You have to recycle your way out. Here, figure out your personal carbon footprint and figure out how to reduce it. But then when people are trying to hold the systems accountable, they say, you can't recycle our way out of this problem. If doing the research, if an American moved outside, never bought another thing, only ate food that was being thrown away, we would still have a larger carbon footprint than people in many, many nations because of the infrastructure that's built in just because we live in this country. There's no way for an individual to individually get us out of this. And then a lot of the suggestions that are made are very small. But I think it's important to give people small, achievable first steps to take. I went to school at Emory University, and the sustainability department had set it up so that we didn't have trash cans. We had these waste assorting devices in every floor, in every room. And when you went with whatever it was you wanted to throw away, you had to figure out, did it go in white paper or colored paper or plastic or compost, or, and then the tiniest hole was for actually, you couldn't put it anywhere else, trash. And it was interesting, but I was there for long enough because I did my master's and then my PhD there, that it was really formational. It seems like just the tiniest, oh, they're just asking you to recycle. But what it actually forced you to do was every time you went to dispose of something, think about your consumption and think about what was happening. And this really hit home. My friend was working for the Office of Sustainability at one of the zero waste events. So it's like a graduation or a party or something. And everything was compostable or recyclable. So there were no trash cans. There was just compost and recycling. And they posted people there to help people figure out where things went. And someone came up to her with a pile of plates and forks and cups from the meal. And she said, "Hi, I'm here to help. Can I help you with that?" And he said, "No, I'm looking for a trash can." And she said, "This is a zero waste event. Everything in your hands is recyclable or compostable. Let me help you with that." And he said, "No, just show me where a trash can is." Like, it seems irrational, but it was a rejection of thinking about consumption and thinking about waste and thinking about where all of this goes to. And so even though those sorting things that they had on every floor seemed like just a small, oh, well, if you just recycle, it was actually a training mechanism to get you to confront those. But you can't just leave it there. You have to, from there, help people find communities that are also starting to take responsibility, also starting to get concerned about these things. Communities where you can learn more and where your power grows. So you learn, what's the next thing I can do? I started recycling. How do I reduce what I buy in the first place? I started recycling. How do I reuse? Or how do I thrift? Or how do I mend? How do I fix things? Is a next step. And then moving on and on. But then the final answer to this that I keep coming back to, and it's not something that's like rah, rah, yay, is these are multi-generational problems. They took hundreds of years for us to get where we are. And it is a position of incredible privilege and just not being able to see, to say, if I'm not able to fix it with the thing that I'm about to do, then I'm going to quit. It's going to take generations to fix these things. That's part of why wicked problems have to be resolved over and over and over again. And so part of our responsibility is not fixing it. We should be doing what we can to move towards fixing it. But the larger part of our responsibility is building multi-generational communities that are willing to take responsibility for continuing the work and expanding the work. And so that's the hardest and longest term part. But I think it's the key, is there's no reason for us to think my action tomorrow is going to fix this. But there is every reason to think that if we start now, then we can build communities that are just as capable of dismantling evil as we built communities that built it in the first place.
No, I love that. I think that this is I'm trying to think of the author. Her name escapes me right now, but who wrote the book Daughters of Dust. Oh, she's at SMU, she's at Perkins. But anyway, basically it's just making the case and argument that you have to start somewhere, and every little step actually does add up over time. But also, I think the point you made about the the forced recycling or the forced composting, how that just is the inability to want to turn inward, inability to want to do the U-turn, as I call it, and say, "Oh, how am I wrapped up in these systems?" Right? And so it's funny. I have tension because I have two questions I want to ask you, but I'm just going to ask one, and I'm set Julie up for the other one because we were in our pre-pod meeting. There was a question Julia said that I was like, "Oh, this really." I have a way to phrase this that I think Dr. Becky might find interesting. But I guess the first question I want to ask is, I think, well, I shouldn't say that. I know, based on the conversations I had, even with people at Easter, with visitors who were coming to the church, that some people are really struggling with how to make sense that their belief in a God that is good given everything that's happening, right? Like the loft, as Julian Wesley, when I first got the job there, like, you know, they persuaded me to leave the academy to come back to work in the local church, particularly Julia. That's why she's making that face. The loft is kind of like, it's like the last stop on the train to like something else. Like, you know, people that come to the loft, they're like, it is literally like, this is the last time I'm trying
Be
Christianity.
done with church. I'm not doing it
Exactly.
anymore.
They're like, if it doesn't work here, I'm out. Like literally, I'm out, you know? And these are the folks that come and the ones really wrestling with the problem, like literally what we would call within the academy the problem of evil, you know, theodicy. Like, how do you make sense of a God that you say is a good God or a God that is a God of love with the reality of evil and suffering? And I think that's such a, for us, at least for me, sometimes that's more of a basic question. It wasn't a question I even brought to seminary because I think I had a particular answer growing up as a poor Black man about evil, but I'll save that to after you give your answer, Dr. Becky. But I'm curious, like, how would you help people, or how would you be, I guess, answer that question? And then how might you encourage folks that are in that space right now, really struggling with trying to believe in God or a God of love in the midst of the things we see happening right now in our current political climate?
I don't want to be too academically theological here, but for me, the answer to the question of theodicy, it's not an answer, but the way that I address it is that, quite frankly, we want God not to be faithful to those that are hurting us.
Mm.
That if God is the creator of all that is, then God is also faithful to all that is. And people, for the question of theodicy, they go back to Hitler all the time. Like, why Hitler? Well, what you're actually asking is, why didn't God snuff Hitler out of existence? Why wasn't God unfaithful to Hitler for all of the things that Hitler did? And so when I think about the question, I'm always thinking about, this is a complex, interdependent world, and God is faithful to all of it. And it's uncomfortable because we want God to be more faithful to us than to those bad people who are doing the bad things. But if God is patient with us, waiting for us to turn around and stop hurting each other, then why would we expect God to be less to someone else just because they're hurting us? And so that doesn't, I mean, there's no answer to the theodicy question, but that is the way that I relate to it, is thinking more about how do we understand a loving God in the face of the fact that with creaturely freedom, so many people are doing so much harm. We're doing harm too. We've just been talking about the various ways that we are doing harm, like flying out to talk to the Italians about racial injustice and environmental injustice.
I hear
Yeah.
you saying, like, so just to try to put maybe like a little pastoral spin on it, if we believe that God can forgive the things that we're messing up, then we have to also believe that God can forgive the things that are bigger, like other people are messing up worse. And it does not actually fix the wicked problems to ask God to undo or like smite creation, but instead we all have to be respectful of the reality that God has made us to be good, and that we all have that capacity, even as some people make choices that are much more harmful to those around them. Like some people are getting an F in the group project, like very clearly, but those of us who are trying to get like a B plus don't get to decide, like don't get to kick the people who are failing out of the group project. Like we're all in it together, whether we want to be or not.
Well, I mean, I think most of us judge the world by whatever our capacity is. Like, we think whatever we're doing is enough.
Yes.
More than what we're doing is great, and we'll admire that. And less than what we're doing is deserving of condemnation. It's hard to broaden that perspective, but also by being faithful to all of creation, by allowing us, God is giving us this room to actually start addressing these problems. God is giving us room to grow.
And I
Um,
even think of like the anger of the description of the guy who just wanted a trash can, right? Like he was angry at the idea that he was being invited to a different way of being, and like that was activating for him, such that he could not see it as an invitation, but instead saw it as a condemnation. And it's making me think that perhaps the problem is not evil. Perhaps perhaps the problem is our own understanding of who we are and who we can be. So I'm going to sit with that for a minute.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, I think that's all wrapped up in evil, honestly, in the way in which we get it's so everything comes, Becky, so many things for me comes back to an inability to actually turn to see how we ourselves are actually complicit in these systems to be self-compassionate, and how self-compassion leads to compassion for others. Like, so what you're saying, especially with respect to the problem of evil, is if we not only recognize that we want God to be able to just not only forgive us or be faithful to us so that we can change, but also see that that change might be transformative towards the good, right? Like to actually, move us. You should ask actually at one point, if you're ever around Dr. McCarty, like how I used to talk about vegetarians and vegans prior to this shift in my life. He has several funny stories
I
because
think
this
I've heard some.
yeah, I'm like, because this is not it was not part of my plan, and yet and still, like the possibility of transformation was there, and to move us toward our better selves. But at the same time, I want to toss it to Julia here, because I think one of the challenges we have is how do we motivate, like, what's the incentive for people who just don't want to do anything? People are just like, I'm out, because Julie, I know at the beginning of the podcast or before we were recording, you're giving the example of a car accident, and you don't have to necessarily give that
Well,
example, but that was, to me, one of the things that was latent in the conversation we're having is, what do you do with folks who, like, when we want to do good on the group project, right? What do you do with those people who only want to do F's? And how do because I hate group projects. I'll be honest with you. I don't assign them in my class.
Yep.
I never assign group projects, because I'm like, you know what? I want to have nothing to do with your grade. You want to do my grade? I'm going to do me. You do you. And that's why
You
this
mean you
is
want
so
them to pull up their
challenging.
grade by their own bootstraps, Dr. Carter?
I,
How dare you?
Yes, I would say yes to
I
that.
do. I do want them to pull their grade up by their own bootstraps. But anyway, Julie, I'll toss it over to you, because I know you have
Well,
a
I
more
think
robust question.
something that you just touched on, like the guy with the composting, it made me think of what you wrote about guilt and shame, and that, like, we never know what people have going on. Obviously, he wasn't mad that he was being asked to compost. Like, obviously, it activated some past trauma. And I think God forgives, because God knows all of our trauma. And like the way to heal it is by being kind to each other. But that's irrelevant, because most people are not kind. Oh, and so what Dr. Carter referred to is, I was talking about this, how I was in a terrible car accident several years ago, like really bad, really, really bad. And it never even occurred to me to sue that man for all that he was worth. Like, it didn't even enter my mind, because it was an accident. Like, he spun out. I've spun out on black guys driving in Wisconsin. Like, I just didn't hit it, right? But then how come a couple years ago, I'm minding my business and I get in a little fender bender, and those people sued me. They sued my insurance company, and it like really messed up my life. And so now I'm over here being like, should I be more evil? Like, should I?
Would we be better off if we came for each other more?
That's a good question.
Well, I would be better off. Like,
Mhm.
and like, I understand that the kids that I hit, this was their opportunity to get money. Everybody is trying to get a bag. I've never tried to get a bag, and that's why I have no bags. And so my point is, like, there are so many days that I feel the boot on my neck. Like, and it affects me in a very real and tangible way. It affects my life. And it is crabs in a barrel. It is dog eat dog, every man for himself, every woman for herself. And like, in theory, love and light. In reality, you better get yours because no one is going to give it to you, and they will take it from you if they get an opportunity. And so how? I feel like as a Black woman, it feels different. It just feels different. So I'm just curious what you think.
That's an easy question, Becky. She's like, why should I not be evil? Because people have been evil to me.
I think that is what it boils down to. Yeah.
No, but not just that, but then if I'm not, then how do I survive?
No, that's what I was gonna say. That's the other part. Is as a Black woman, that's the part. Is like, how do you survive in the midst of a
Like,
system that's inherently designed to, you know, to exploit and take advantage, particularly people in your own condition, right? Condition. That's not the right word. People who are you, right? Like
right.
people
And
who
like,
are women, people who are Black. Yeah.
I'm well loved. I have a good community, but that's like, it's not the same as $100,000 because someone spun out and hit my car. Unless anyone here wants to give me $100,000, I will not complain. But I'm just saying, like, it's different, you know? Practicality.
I begged her not to ask this question. I think it has to do with the kind of person you want to be, for one thing. For people who just don't care or who are actively doing evil, I don't really have an argument. Like, hopefully they have a community of people they love and respect who will be able to put some pressure on them to choose to be different kinds of people. But for the individual who's saying, well, I'm watching evil flourish around me, well, that's throughout the Bible. Lots of people complaining about watching evil flourishing around them. But thinking about what kinds of people we want to be. And I use a lot of like moral philosophical stuff in the book, which we won't go into everything. But there's ways that I talk about agency and moral responsibility, but I think we could talk about it in becoming, fully flourishing, fully human. Um, we we become more human as we take responsibility for our community, as we take responsibility for our lives, and as we take action for that, and as we deepen our connections. And yeah, Dr. Carter, I don't like to assign group projects either. And in the one class, the one assignment that we do, Blair put together a beautiful peer evaluation to make sure that there were checks and balances for our groups, so that everybody did their part. And for those who go into academics, we usually were the ones doing the work on the group project. But the whole point of paying attention to what human beings are in progressive Christianity is paying attention to how we become more fully human when we take care of our fellow creatures, our fellow beings, our fellow humans. And there's a long history, you said before the pod, about built by men for men. There's a long history of moral philosophy that says responsibility is about who can blame you for what. So who can hold you responsible for the situations that we are in? But I turned away from that tradition to look for the tools. And what I found was Black women, Latinx women, turn of the century lesbians, were the ones writing with real poignancy about responsibility in terms of trying to put your life together, trying to build a community. That these are not people worried about who do I put blame on for the situation I'm in. They're looking for how do we live together tomorrow. And that, I think, is the human project, is forward looking, building stronger communities that take care of each other so that you don't end up in debt when you get hit or when you accidentally fender bender a kid, to build these better communities. So it's not going to answer whether, you'd be materially better off if you sued somebody for $100,000. But it has to do with you'll answer that for yourself. Would you be pleased with yourself if you were going after the kid in that way? Would you be pleased with yourself if you were doing to them what's being done to you? Is that the kind of person that you think you're being called to be? And so paying attention to what are the calls on our lives, I think is really important.
That's
I think
beautiful and so annoying. Because
Not
no,
fun.
I do not want to be that person. Ugh.
It's way easier and way more fun to be evil.
I
But-
mean,
And
yeah,
more lucrative.
people are having a good time. I'm
yeah.
not.
But at the end of the group project, y'all, we like there will be an end to the group project if we believe in a theological Christian understanding of an eschaton, right? And like there will be a point where God puts it all right back together again, and I would rather live in a world where I get to see glimpses of that in my everyday life than just like waiting for God to fix it.
As the person without a theology degree in there, what is the word you just, a who?
An
Escha-
eschaton. So the
Who's that?
next, the thing to come.
Blair on the Progressive Christians podcast just invoked Judgment Day.
I did. Because and we talk all the
Little
time. Like, I'm the
evangelical.
evangelical, right? I'm the evangelical, little e evangelical. But like, I do believe that Christ came and Christ will come again, right? So there is
And that
going
these
to
people
be,
will answer?
I think they're gonna at least be real uncomfortable and have to like face themselves. I think really that's probably what Judgment Day is you actually have to face yourself and all of the choices you've made and suddenly see with God's vision, with God's eyes, the effect that your choices had on the rest of creation. And that you're going to have to feel that.
Without the denial and the obfuscation and the excuses and everything else.
Exactly.
I would love to observe that. Oh my gosh. I would
I'm gonna trust you'll be there,
love.
Julia. You'll be
hanging out with Peter, just chilling, just watching
Oh
folks.
my
Like, yeah, sitting there with
gosh.
your popcorn, just
Oh,
eating.
Mitch McConnell. Now what do you say?
So speaking
Carolyn
of
Levitt.
judgment, I just know we're getting to the end of the hour. So I do also, if anybody has further questions for Dr. Becky, I'll offer that right now. But then I know we have 2 pop culture things we wanted to squeeze in as well.
Yeah, no, I know. One thing I wanted to say, well, a couple of things with respect to this transition was just to talk about the as I mentioned, I was at the Vatican. I've been at the Vatican. I've done some work. I worked at a Roman Catholic institution for a long time, and we are sad. I am sad. I shouldn't speak for y'all. I am sad.
I am devastated.
That
He's the
Pope,
best Pope.
he's the
best Pope.
I loved, and it's not that I mean, he's a human. He had his flaws, and even with respect to some of his beliefs, I would have challenged him on. But in terms of where he was trying to lead the church, I feel like Pope Francis did such a great job of humanizing the church and bringing people closer to an understanding of what it meant to actually have a praxis, a theology about what it means to actually try to be more Christ-like. And I loved it. I have Laudato Si sitting right here on my desk because I'm doing Earth Day sermon on Sunday. And after he died, I was like, well, let me make sure I'm using this to give him, the respect that I believe he deserves. And also, I know that we've often made fun of JD Vance's conversion to Catholicism, and I know that originally I had heard that he wasn't going to be able to meet with the Pope, but then
So here's the
Okay, here you go.
conspiracy, because
Okay.
I texted when I found out on Monday that the Pope had died. I was devastated, and I texted my husband immediately, and he goes, I said, the Pope died. And he goes, 24 hours after meeting JD Vance, which immediately I was like, oh, this is some like Netflix Dan Brown BS right here. And like, did JD Vance kill the Pope? But he was supposed to have an audience with the Pope. The Pope declined to be part of that. Like, it was not an audience that it was like just Pope Francis meeting with JD Vance. It was like, because the Vatican is a country, it was like a foreign policy gathering, and the Pope decided not to go to it. And then JD Vance and the Pope just like ran into each other in the Vatican. So JD Vance did get to meet the Pope, but it wasn't on purpose. And instead, over the weekend, Pope Francis preached, Easter sermons basically about caring for creation and caring for the immigrant, and just like slammed the Trump administration and had declined to meet with JD Vance. But I'm telling you, if JD Vance and the like evil Catholics killed the Pope, I'm not saying it happened, but I could believe that it happened.
I mean, I think it's also conceivable to think that like, he died of cringe after
I
meeting
mean,
JD
that's
Vance.
what I was gonna say. Like, wouldn't you just?
Just absolutely.
Wouldn't you just? I probably would. I would be tempted at least.
Oh God, I think cringe definitely could take us out after meeting someone like JD Vance. I also know
JD
as
Vance, a beloved child of God,
To whom God is faithful.
to whom God is
is
faithful.
faithful.
Look at
Yeah,
Julia reminding us
and
to
I'm
love
like,
one another.
exactly.
Well,
But
I'm not a professional.
yeah, I oh anyway. I know you also want to talk about Andor, so I'm gonna turn it over to y'all because, as you well know, I ain't really watching a lot of TV
Dr. Hart,
right
you haven't
now.
seen it?
No, I have not.
Oh,
Who
Oh,
doesn't
you're gonna
see
have to watch it.
anything?
yeah, but there's art and then there's art. And
And
Andor is art.
so I know actually Dr. Becky was the one who brought up Andor in our pre-conference or our pre-pod conversation. But like my husband and I just rewatched it. It's so well written. There are no plot holes. It's so beautifully shot. And just the way that it talks about resistance and empire and like being part of something that's bigger than yourself. It's really beautiful. And then the first 3 episodes of the new season just dropped yesterday. So Dr. Becky, what do you love about Andor? Like, can you remind us again? Like, why did that rise as a part of this conversation?
I mean, yes, it's well written and everything, but I've been seeing a lot on Blue Sky on social media of people saying rewatching the first season because the second season's about to drop, and it hits so differently now. In the first season, you have the rising of the rebellion. You have the rebellion is happening spontaneously all over the empire. You have the manifesto of the young rebel who's trying to write philosophically about it. And he's talking about how the empire is throwing so many atrocities at us so that we don't have time to react. You have a man wrongfully imprisoned and shipped to a faraway land and put into a prison from which he will never be released. And you have the people rising up and saying, you know, the speech at the end of the first episode when she says, you know, they came and we paid no attention to them because we had each other and we had our planet. And so we did what they wanted. We kept their shipping lanes open. We kept the business running and they left us alone. And so we ignored them, but we can't ignore them anymore. There's so much of it that is so timely, disturbingly. So much of our dystopian literature is now so very prescient.
Yeah, I mean, this is so we happen to actually be reading Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower at the very beginning of
When the wildfires started.
Yeah, which was wild. But then also just the way in which obviously that story, especially if you read Parable of the Talents, is about the rise of fascism in America, right? And it's so prescient. You're just like, we have some authors, some creatives who are able to really piece together what we see happening and do it in a way that I think, sometimes we struggle to do in theology and religious studies, in a way that's persuasive, because sometimes there are better storytellers. I mean, part of my job as a pastor is to tell a persuasive story every Sunday. And sometimes it's great. And sometimes it's just, it's okay. It's good, And so I think these kinds of stories and films are able to really help us make sense of and put flesh on what it is we're experiencing, a way that we can relate to it. One of the
And
things that
we know
go ahead.
about, I was just going to say, we know that Andor feels so different for a lot of people watching it the second time. And Dr. Becky, you said I know that anybody on this podcast who watched it the first time was like, oh, I see what they're doing here. I see the parallels. I know where I am in the story. But we were talking about in this conversation, people who can't see themselves in the story, or who don't want to, or who are refusing to. And so why I love art, and why I think we do try to talk about art and media in our conversations here, is that art can help us see ourselves in the story in the way that sometimes news or politics or intellectual academic writing, like we keep ourselves separate. But art forces us to realize and feel that we are actually part of the story.
I hadn't even thought about that, but perhaps Andor has an answer to Julia's question.
Ooh, give it to us.
Because in this story you have characters who are in the mess of things. Cassian Andor is out to get rich. He's a poor guy from a poor town, out robbing some people, smuggling some things, just trying to get rich. And through life experiences comes to join the resistance, comes to join the rebellion, comes to start taking responsibility. And it's a story of so many characters from so many different walks of life who didn't care at one point, and how they come to care and how they come to be part of trying to build a different world.
I think one of the things absolutely. Oh, Julie, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and the way that is generally through relationship.
Yeah.
They meet people, they experience things, they see things, they understand other perspectives, and it changes them.
And again, this is why art and media are so important, and such a heavy responsibility is for so many people, because of the way in which our society is economically and racially and culturally segmented in the United States. Those literal relationships may never come, but through media, through art, through entertainment, we are able to share stories that feel relational, that allow people to connect with something that's different than what they would experience in their everyday lives. And that's really important and really powerful. And I'm just really glad to see something as big as the Star Wars universe and as powerful as Disney being used in a way that I think is helping people see themselves differently. That's gospel work. I think that's gospel work.
Yeah, no, I agree. Last thing I wanted to say was I think that one of the things that I appreciate about your book and even this conversation are the ways in which you, as a white woman, as an educator, as an educated person, understands the role and importance of accountability, Becky. And I think that there's so many times that in this conversation, I just kept thinking one of the challenges that we're confronted with is so often people in power, because they tend to be, white folk, tend to be men, or tend to be people who are wealthy, want to give other people the benefit of the doubt, right? That they're going to do the right thing and not hold them accountable, right? And so I was just even thinking about the Supreme Court. And we didn't mention that Becky's also was a lawyer for years before she came on here, before she decided to had to go back to redeem herself from the time serving on the bar. But, you think about like the fact that they pass, or they rule essentially before, Trump is running for president, that the actions that a president takes, that they can't be held accountable for, that essentially they can be a felon and commit crimes, but because they can call it presidential duties, that there's nothing they can be held accountable for. They laid the groundwork for what we're seeing now, because their assumption was that, their assumption is that someone isn't going to do something as bad as what he's actually doing. They're giving him the benefit of the doubt, right? And then, like, I go back to the Voting Rights Act, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. The idea is like, oh, we don't need to have these regulations in for the South because that's been 20 some odd years. Maybe we're not racist anymore. There's no evidence to say that we're not racist anymore, but let's give these people that were been racist and enslaving folks for 400 years the benefit of the doubt. Like, it doesn't make any sense, like, to give people the benefit of the doubt if you actually believe in sin. Like, that's the part. I'm like, if you believe in the reality of sin, you don't have to give people the benefit of the doubt. You can create systems to hold us accountable because you recognize we all can fall victim and prey to that reality, because it is unoriginal, as you described. And so that's one of the like enduring frustrations that I have with respect to the way we talk about sin or having a robust theology of sin, is you have conservatives who say they ostensibly believe in sin, but at the same time act like they can't sin, or they don't sin, or their idea of sin is a set of particular acts, rather than recognizing we participate in systems, right, that uphold harm and do harm to others, and that systems that are in fact sinful. And it's choosing to give each other the benefit of the doubt rather than stepping into your accountability, because that's fundamentally uncomfortable. And what I see you do, and what I fail to see so many white people do, is step into that uncomfortability and be like, yep, it's uncomfortable. I don't always have the right answer. I'm going to make a mistake sometimes, but the only way I know to move is to move forward, because I'm not going back. I'm actually trying to go forward. And so that, yeah, I want you to know how much that means to me as a person of color reading your scholarship, that I can feel like I can give this to another person of color and be like, this is what white people should be doing. So thank you. I said that sincerely. Like, I've already thought about how I want to use this and incorporate this in my own anti-racism work, because I can really see how it might be helpful for some people. So, you're doing great work. So good job.
Thank you. I'm for clip.
Oh, Chris Carter, I think you are doing really compassionate work, assuming that people are giving a benefit of a doubt. I don't think that that's the case, just to be clear. I think
Julia
more
knows ultimately
nefarious.
everybody's out to get their back. That's really what's happening here.
I think that it is much more nefarious than you are willing to sometimes admit, but that's okay. That's why you're a pastor, and I'm not.
Wow.
Oh man, yes. Well, Becky, before we close, is there any like, where can people find you? Do you have, like, website, social media? I think you said you are not on social media, but where do you want people to go to find your stuff, your articles, and they get access to your books or any of your other work?
My books are with Baylor University Press. I am on Blue Sky, but I don't even know what my handle is.
We'll put it in the show notes. I can find it. We'll put it in the show notes.
I am really socially media unsavvy.
This podcast has forced me to get savvy, because of just the ways in which it's forced me to engage the world and to be a present in social media. So Becky, we want to honestly just thank you so much for this work. Yeah, round of applause. Thank you so much for this work. Thank you so much for this book. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on our little resistance movement. We're trying to stand up and rage against the machine, if you will. So we want to thank you all for joining us for the Progressive Christians podcast. The Progressive Christian podcast is a ministry of The Loft, a worship community of West William Methodist Church. If you would like to connect with us and be a part of the conversation, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Again, we are now on YouTube, so please subscribe to our channel on YouTube. That would be great to get the subscription numbers up, so that we can actually compete with some of the more conservative Christian content you tend to find on that channel. Our show is mixed and edited by our wonderful audio engineer, AJ Goodlow. Thanks you all for listening, and we will see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.